Chernobyl, Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, you've heard those names. You probably think you know the full story, but most of the deadliest nuclear reactors in history aren't the ones that made international headlines. Let's start with the ones you think are just bad and slowly work our way toward the absolute worst mistakes humanity ever made with atoms. Number 6, SL-1 Experimental Reactor. Idaho Falls, 1961, middle of winter. 3 military operators are alone inside a tiny prototype reactor designed to power remote Arctic bases. It's late, it's routine maintenance, and one guy grabs a control rod to reconnect it. He pulls it out 26 inches too far. In less than a second, the reactor goes from 0 to 20 gigawatts. That's not a typo. 20,000 megawatts in 4 milliseconds. The water inside flash boils instantly, creating a steam explosion so violent it lifts the entire 9-ton reactor vessel 9 feet into the air. One operator is impaled to the ceiling by a control rod plug, dead on impact. The other 2 die from trauma and radiation within minutes. When the first responders arrive, their dosimeters max out immediately. They can only stay inside for 60 seconds at a time. The bodies are so contaminated that hands and heads have to be buried separately in lead-lined caskets, treated as nuclear waste. Here's the kicker. Investigators never fully agreed on what caused the guy to yank the rod that far. Some said mechanical failure, others whispered about a love triangle and personal distress. Either way, the reactor's design was flawed from the start, relying on manual control rods that could be withdrawn too far, too fast. The incident forced a complete overhaul of how experimental reactors were built, adding fail-safes and automation so one bad pull couldn't vaporize a crew. But those 3 men paid the price first. The SL-1 site was decontaminated, entombed, and quietly buried in the Idaho desert. If you drive past it today, there's just a plaque and a patch of dirt that still makes Geiger counters tick. Dead. Number 5, 3 Mile Island Unit 2, Pennsylvania, March 28, 1979. 4 in the morning. A feed water pump fails. Not a huge deal, except a relief valve sticks open and starts draining coolant from the reactor core. The control room's instruments are misleading the operators, telling them the core is covered when it's actually half exposed. Temperatures spike to over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Half the core melts. Hydrogen gas builds up, and there's a small explosion inside the containment building. The public panics. Pregnant women and young children within 5 miles are told to evacuate. The media runs wild with doomsday scenarios. But here's the twist. No one dies, not from radiation, not directly. Average exposure to the surrounding population was about 1 millirem, roughly the same as a chest x-ray. Containment held, but the damage was already done. Public trust in nuclear power in the United States collapsed overnight. Dozens of planned reactors were canceled. The industry went into a decades-long freeze. 3 Mile Island became the cautionary tale that reshaped global nuclear safety standards. Even though it didn't technically kill anyone, the cleanup took 14 years and cost $1 billion. The melted core was so dangerous it had to be remotely chipped away and shipped in shielded casks. Unit 2 never restarted. It sits there today, a sealed tomb next to its still operating twin. The lesson? You don't need bodies to have a disaster. Sometimes fear and policy shifts do more damage than the radiation ever could. Exactly. Number 4, Windscale Pile. Number 1, Sellafield, UK, October 10th, 1957. Britain is in the middle of the Cold War nuclear arms race, desperately trying to produce plutonium for atomic bombs. Windscale's Pile Number 1 is an air-cooled, graphite-moderated reactor built fast and cheap. During a routine annealing process to release built-up energy in the graphite, operators accidentally overheat the core. The graphite catches fire. For 3 days, uranium cartridges burn at over 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit, pumping radioactive smoke straight up the stack and across the UK and Europe. No filters, no scrubbers, just raw iodine-131, cesium, and polonium riding the wind. The fire team tries everything. Fans, CO2, nothing works. In desperation, they turn to water hose, risking a steam explosion or hydrogen blast. It works, but barely. The fire finally dies down after flooding the core. No immediate deaths, but models estimate 240 excess cancer cases over the following decades from the fallout. Milk from 500 square kilometers is dumped to prevent thyroid damage in children. The incident is hushed up for years, downplayed as a minor event. Windscale is eventually renamed Sellafield to distance the site from the disaster. Investigations later revealed the reactor had design flaws from day one, and the operational pressure to keep plutonium production on schedule overrode basic safety protocols. The site today is still one of the most contaminated places in Europe, undergoing cleanup that won't finish for another century. This was Britain's nuclear ambition, literally going up in smoke. And the scary part? It could have been so much worse. If that water gamble had triggered a hydrogen explosion, half of northern England would have been evacuated. Gone. Number 3. Mayak production reactors, Kishtim disaster. Ozyorsk, Soviet Russia, September 29, 1957. You've probably never heard of this one. That's on purpose. The Mayak complex was a secret plutonium production site, churning out material for Stalin's nuclear weapons program in the 1940s and 50s. They built reactors fast, dumped waste faster. Cooling systems for waste storage tanks were neglected. On that September day, a tank holding 70 to 100 tons of high-level liquid waste overheats. The cooling system had failed months earlier. No one fixed it. The tank explodes with a force equivalent to 70 to 100 tons of TNT, hurling the concrete lid into the air and releasing a radioactive plume that spread over 300 square miles. No mushroom cloud, no international news, just a silent, invisible killer drifting over villages. The Soviet government evacuates 10,000 people a week later, but only after radiation levels are through the roof. Villages are bulldozed and erased from maps. Residents are relocated with no explanation, told it's a military exercise. Hundreds, possibly thousands, develop cancers over the following decades. The nearby Teka River becomes known as the River of Death. Birth defects spike. Chronic radiation syndrome ravages communities. But because it's classified, the world doesn't hear about it until the 1980s, when a Soviet scientist defects and tells the story. Even today, the Mayak site remains one of the most polluted places on Earth, with contamination still leaking into groundwater. The disaster highlighted the reckless disregard for safety in the Soviet nuclear weapons program and the human cost of Cold War secrecy, up to 200 cancer deaths, entire communities erased, and the West didn't even know it happened for 20 years. Hands down, one of history's most covered up nuclear nightmares. Number 2, Fukushima Daiichi. Reactors Units 1 through 3. Fukushima, Japan, March 11, 2011. A 9.0 magnitude earthquake hits off the coast. The reactors automatically shut down. So far, so good. But then a 15-meter tsunami, taller than the seawall, slams into the plant 41 minutes later. Backup generators flood. Cooling systems fail. Within hours, 3 reactor cores start to melt. Hydrogen builds up. Units 1, 3, and 4 explode, blowing roofs off and scattering debris. Radiation spikes. The Japanese government orders evacuations in expanding rings, eventually displacing 160,000 people. Elderly patients in hospitals and nursing homes are moved in chaos. Many die in transit or shortly after, not from radiation, but from the stress, dehydration, and lack of medical care during the evacuation. Over 1,000 evacuation-related deaths. One direct radiation death confirmed years later, but here's the real story. Nature won. Despite all the engineering, all the redundancy, all the safety drills, a natural disaster overwhelmed the technology. The spent fuel pools nearly went dry. If that had happened, the release of cesium-137 could have made Tokyo uninhabitable. Workers, later called the Fukushima 50, stayed behind in lethal conditions to pump water and prevent total catastrophe. Some of them absorbed doses that will shorten their lives. The cleanup is still ongoing, with contaminated water being stored in thousands of tanks and plans to release treated water into the ocean, sparking international debate. The exclusion zone is slowly shrinking, but some areas won't be safe for habitation for decades. Fukushima proved that even modern reactors in a wealthy, technologically advanced nation can fail when nature and bad luck align. It's a humbling reminder that some forces are bigger than our best designs. And yet, it's still not the worst. Number 1. Chernobyl reactor. Number 4. Pripyat, Ukraine, April 26, 1986. This is the one. The disaster that defines nuclear fear for an entire generation. Reactor number 4 was an RBMK type reactor, a Soviet design with a fatal flaw, a positive void coefficient. Essentially, under certain conditions, losing coolant makes the reaction speed up instead of slowing down. On that night, operators are running a safety test simulating a blackout. They disable key safety systems to keep the test going. Power drops too low, they try to recover it, control rods are pulled out too far, the reactor becomes unstable. At 1:23 a.m., they hit the emergency shutdown button. The control rods have graphite tips that briefly increase reactivity before they can absorb neutrons. Power surges to 33,000 megawatts, 10 times the reactor's capacity. A massive steam explosion blows the 2,000-ton reactor lid off. A second explosion follows. The graphite core ignites, burning at over 2,500 degrees and launching radioactive particles into the atmosphere for 10 days. 28 firefighters and plant workers die within weeks from acute radiation syndrome. Their bodies absorb doses so high their bone marrow disintegrates, their skin sloughs off, and their organs shut down one by one. Over 600,000 liquidators, cleanup crews, and soldiers are sent in to shovel radioactive debris build the sarcophagus, and decontaminate the area. Many receive doses that lead to cancers and early deaths. Estimates of long-term cancer deaths range from 4,000, according to the UN, to tens of thousands from other studies. The exact number is still debated because tracking cancer causation across populations decades later is nearly impossible, but the human toll isn't even the full picture. Pripyat, a city of 50,000, is evacuated 36 hours after the explosion. Residents are told it's temporary. They leave everything behind: toys, photos, dishes on the table. The city is frozen in time. A 30-kilometer exclusion zone is established, and it's still in place today. Forests die and turn red. Animals absorb radiation and pass it through the food chain. Birth defects spike in nearby regions. Thyroid cancers in children explode due to iodine-131 in milk. The psychological trauma, the forced relocations, the stigma of being a Chernobyl survivor, all of it compounds the disaster beyond the raw numbers. The Soviet government initially tries to cover it up, delaying evacuation and downplaying the severity. Only when radiation detectors in Sweden start going off does the world realize something catastrophic has happened. The lack of transparency and the systemic failures, cutting corners on safety, ignoring design flaws, prioritizing political pressure over protocols, turned a flawed reactor into a civilization-ending event for that region. The sarcophagus built over reactor number 4 is now enclosed in a massive steel arch, designed to last 100 years. But the core underneath is still radioactive, still dangerous, still a reminder that one night of mistakes and bad design irradiated a continent. Chernobyl is the benchmark. It's the reactor disaster every other one gets measured against. It's the ghost city, the liquidators, the government lies, and the exclusion zone that nature is slowly reclaiming. It's the cautionary tale that proves when you mix human error, design flaws, and political pressure in a nuclear reactor, you don't just get an accident, you get a catastrophe that echoes for generations. Dead? If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on screen now.